So which gray is the right gray for your artist palette? I'm looking at two different colors of gray acrylic paint. I'm looking at Payne's gray, which is a very, very popular color of gray paint, as well as a completely neutral gray. I'm going to look at how they mix with other colors, a little bit about the properties of each, and why you might want to have them on your palette, and maybe by the end it'll help you decide what color to put onto your palette. So the first gray that I'm looking at today is the Liquitex Professional Heavy Body Acrylic, and that's Payne's gray, and the other gray is N5 Neutral Gray, and that's from Golden Artist Colors. So let's talk first about Payne's gray. If you're a watercolor artist, or if you've spent any time kind of in the watercolor world, you've probably heard of Payne's gray because it is so popular in the watercolor world. And it's also popular for acrylic paint. It's a very pleasing blue-gray, and it's very dark. A lot of artists will use it as a substitute for black because it's just basically one value step down from black. It's named after a watercolor artist from England who developed a mix of Prussian blue, yellow ochre, and crimson lake. And Payne's gray is really nice because it has blue to its gray, and it can create a sense of atmosphere with distant objects, which are always, a little bit bluer. And it's also just a beautiful color. And Liquitex's version of Payne gray uses a mix of the ultramarine blue, bone black, and ultramarine violet pigments. And that means you can mix your own if you happen to have those paints. Now the other version of gray, the N5 Neutral Gray, the neutral gray line that Golden has is very interesting. So they've taken a completely neutral gray, so it doesn't lean blue and it doesn't lean warm, so it's not cool, not warm, it's completely neutral. And they have 8 different steps of neutral gray. So this one, N5, it's right in the middle. The steps go from N1 to N10, but N1 is bone black and N10 is titanium white, and then there's 8 steps in the middle of different versions of gray that are just one step darker or lighter than each other, depending which way you're going up or down the value scale. So N5 right in the middle. Payne's gray itself, it would be a similar value to an N2 neutral gray, so it's just one step up the value scale from pure black. So N5 completely neutral, doesn't lean warm or cool. But it's very important to understand that when I start showing you the swatches, it will seem warm because it's beside Payne's gray, which leans blue, leans quite cool, so it'll seem warm in comparison. Color temperatures, they can be very relative to what it is beside. So if you had this neutral gray up against an orange, it would seem cool, but against near Payne's gray, it'll seem warm. Now, similar to the Payne's gray, the N5 Neutral Gray uses a mix of 3 pigments. It uses titanium white, bone black, and iron oxide, and it's an opaque paint. Now let's take a look at the color swatches and how they mix with other colors. So this side is the Payne's gray, and this side is the neutral gray. There we go. So the Payne's gray, straight out of the tube, very, very, very dark. Almost black. Like I said, it's one step up the value scale from bone black, and a lot of artists don't like to use any sort of black on their palette because it can be deadening or seem like it just takes all life out of the painting. So a lot of artists will use a gray, a very, very dark gray instead. And as you can see, I've added a little bit of titanium white to each of these mixes, and you can see it is a little bit cool. Definitely a gray, but a cool gray. Now I've done some color mixes here. Everything on the right here on the left here is a lot more of the color and just a little bit of the Payne's gray. And then here is a lot of the Payne's gray and a little bit of the color. And then I've added a little bit of titanium white to each of those mixes so you can see a little bit better what we're dealing with. So because Payne's gray has a bit of blue in it, that ultramarine blue that's part of the mix, or at least part of the Liquitex's version of it, you can make some nice little greens. You can make quite a dark green, dark olivey green out of either the Hansa Yellow or Cadfrey Yellow Medium, but very, very grayed out. And here you can really just tone down the brightness of the Hansa Yellow Lemon or the Cadfrey Yellow Lemon and just bring it a little bit closer to green. Now the two reds, Cadfrey Red Medium and Quin Magenta, The Cadfree Red Medium, it becomes a little bit muddier, I would say, with the Payne's Gray. Again, just kind of toned down, whereas the Quin Magenta, it becomes more purple. And that's not a surprise because of the blue in the Payne's Gray, and Quin Magenta itself leans a little bit blue, so it just brings it to a nice purple. Ultramarine blue, because there's already ultramarine blue in the Payne's Gray, really we're just getting almost like a darker version of the ultramarine blue. So it's not a dramatic change. Neither of these are hugely different. I mean, you can get a really, really dark blue or just, a slightly darkened ultramarine blue. The phthalo green definitely kind of dims it down. Phthalo green is a very intense, bright color. So adding a bit of the Payne's Gray definitely dims it down. And then I have some of the secondary colors, so dioxazine purple. Dioxazine purple is a very strong color, and you can really just, again, kind of like the phthalo blue, kind of dim it down a little bit, just tone it down. And that's a lot what gray is used for quite a bit, is just toning down colors. Sap green, now because of the blue, it just it doesn't change the green itself dramatically, but again, tones it down a lot. And then the cad orange, now because Payne's Gray has a lot of blue in it, cad orange is on the opposite side, or orange is on the opposite side of the color wheel, so it really muddies it, we'll call it muddies it up, but makes it a lot browner. So if you have some Payne's Gray and some orange and you want a brown, those are the two that's the mix that you would want to use. Now let's look at the neutral gray. So like I said, in comparison to the Payne's Gray, neutral gray seems very warm, but it is a very neutral gray. It just happens to be beside Payne's Gray, which is quite cool, so it makes it seem warm. But it is quite neutral. And as you look through all of the different color mixes that are here, what's interesting about it is it doesn't change the color. Like here you have the Quin Magenta becomes more purple. Here, the Quin Magenta, it's just kind of a more toned down version of Quin Magenta. So it still feels like a Quin Magenta, just not as intense. So neutral gray, as you go through it's not as dark, of course, as the Payne's Gray, because it is the middle step of the value scale, whereas Payne's Gray is close to the darkest end. So you don't have as much room here to make it lighter, but I did a few mixes with titanium white, so nice, clean and neutral all the way through. With the yellows, it doesn't push it to be more green like in the Payne's Gray mixes. Again, just kind of toned down versions of the colors. Cadfree, I already talked about Quin Magenta, the Cadfree Red Medium, it's still red. Nice bricky versions, so you can make some really nice, just really gray, slightly tinted towards the, or slightly leaned towards the Cadfree or red version of a brick. The blues, again, they still look like the blues that they are, just not as intense. They're not as like screaming bright as they can be straight out of the tube. And you can make some really nice blue grays out of this. Obviously, if you wanted to make a Payne's Gray essentially out of N5 neutral gray, or like a mid-range, you would just use just a touch of the blue to get closer to that rather than this amount. So we look at the three secondary colors, dioxazine purple, just bringing down the intensity of the chroma so that it's not quite so intense. And sap green, again, brought down so it's not quite so intense. And cad orange, it's not as I'd say muddy as the Payne's Gray, just brought down so it's not quite so chromatically intense. And the other thing to keep in mind when you're using N5 neutral gray specifically, if you have this particular value step, is you're not necessarily getting the darks as easily as the Payne's Gray, because it has titanium white in it already. Once you add a bit of the neutral gray, it brings it closer to the value that the N5 neutral gray is. So it is theoretically at least harder to get darks if you want something especially closer to the gray side. I mean, here the phthalo blue and the dioxazine purple, they're still pretty dark. But if you want it to be quite gray, or just like a hint of color with the gray, it's definitely going to be harder to get your darks. So now I'll show you some paintings that I did. These are just 2 quick paintings that I did. This one is the Payne's gray, and this one is the N5 neutral gray. And it's just a painting of a succulent from above, and a very colorful, used a lot of creative liberties in what the colors would actually be. So Payne's gray is this top one, and as you can see, you can get some really, really beautiful grayed out colors. I didn't have any issue getting any sort of darks out of it, which is no surprise because Payne's gray is such a dark color straight out of the tube. And I was just able to get, everything seems quite unified. I tried to use pretty much every color that I had on the palette, all the different versions. I don't think I used too much of the yellow, but I used some of the orange even in this, and then obviously a lot of the magentas and the reds and the blues and the greens. So I think it worked really, really nicely as a color to kind of gray out everything and kind of give it a unified sense. I tried to use some Payne's gray in every single stroke of paint on here. Now the N5 neutral gray, when I went to do this, I thought, well, I'm going to struggle getting the darks, but I didn't have any issues. Like, look how dark that is. That's almost as dark as that. And here is definitely as dark as up there. And that's because I used the phthalo blue green shade and the dioxazine purple. Those are very dark, just add a little bit of a touch of the neutral gray, and I was able to get some nice darks. So as long as you have a nice comprehensive palette, you shouldn't have any issue getting some darks. And yeah, similar to the Payne's gray painting above, I used, tried to use some of the N5 neutral gray in every single stroke, and it just created this nice unified sense. Nothing is too intense in here, despite how vibrant the colors theoretically are. So I thought either worked really, really well. In the future, once I'm done the Payne's gray, I don't know if I will buy the Payne's gray again because it does lean a little bit blue. I really like the concept of being able to mix with a truly neutral gray. So it's still the color, it's just purely toned down. It seems like such a convenience tube to have, to be able to just, here's some gray. I just want this gray down. I don't want it as intense, but I still want it to be that color. So in the future, once I've done these 2 tubes, I might end up just getting the N2 version, which would be the similar value as the Payne's gray, but truly neutral. So the N2 neutral gray might be the next tube of gray that I buy.